All right, so welcome, Marcel. Thank you very much for being our very first interview guest on what is hopefully, I guess, a new interview series for this channel. Being our inaugural guest and also being the lead developer and I guess CEO in a way of Studio 397, one of my personal favorite sim racing developers, it's an absolute honor to have you here. So how are things going, man? How are you guys doing at Studio 397?
Thanks for having me, Armin. Actually, things are going really well at Studio. I mean, we started 4 years and a few days ago, actually. When we started out, really, we didn't expect to be this successful. In fact, I didn't have much of an expectation because it was a bit of a leap in the dark for me to take over. Been sim racing all my life, so it's been a hobby that's got out of hand. And from that point of view, I wasn't quite sure what I was getting myself into. But really, if we look at the business year over year, sales are increasing, the team is growing. I think we're getting more and more professional. And right now, things are actually looking pretty bright, and we're already planning stuff for next year. So yeah, we're in a really good place.
That's fantastic. And you guys obviously just released the brand new Ferrari 488 GT3 Evo, which I did feature the other day and everything. So that was super fun, super amazing. It's my favorite chassis. You know, what are the near-term goals for rFactor 2? Like, what else can we expect? I think you guys just teased a new iconic European track, which everyone's trying to guess desperately.
Yeah, I'm not going to give away exactly what track that is, but I know everybody's guessing, and the downside is there's quite a few iconic tracks in Europe, so there's a few options. But yeah, that's definitely coming, and it will for sure be coming this year. We are also working on some other stuff. I think you'll see most of it relatively close to Christmas sale, and we'll have a few surprises before that even. Yeah, on the content side, a lot of stuff's in production right now. And that's it's going according to schedule, I would say, so that's good. On the development side, I think we're working on two things really hard at the moment. The first is to actually finalize the new UI, make sure that it works as well or better as the old one. And that for us really is a starting point to be able to add a lot more features and to improve the overall user experience a lot. So that's super important for us to get that done. Certainly that will be out before Christmas, and currently we're working on a few technical bits there to make sure that it is a better experience. We're also working on localizing it so it will be available in more languages going forward. And for us, that's also the basis to build on our competition system. And that, I guess, is one of the features that people ask for most. Well, they ask for it in different ways, really. But a lot of people are giving us feedback that there's so little to do in rFactor 2, right? You start it up, and basically from that moment on, you're on your own. You can race offline against the AI. There's a few servers you can join. There's definitely a lot of leagues you can join, but it's really hard if you just fire it up in the evening, come back from work, and you go, okay, I want to have a race now. Let me see what's up. So that's a situation we really want to fix going forward, to make sure that whenever you fire it up, there's something there for you to do and to race, hopefully in your favorite cars and on your favorite tracks. So that's really the goal for the short term, Armin.
That's wonderful. So I was actually going to circle back around and touch on the multiplayer, but you already kind of touched on that with the competition system. So, you know, from a selfish point of view, from a personal point of view, I have a small group of friends I occasionally sim race with, and I can't get them to play anything outside of their own little nucleus of sims that are super easy to set up lobbies in. So I'm guessing a part of this UI and competition system overhaul is that you might make it a bit easier to set up casual lobbies with friends rather than needing a dedicated server?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the sort of side goals that we have. Well, first of all, we hope that by providing a lot of racing, a lot less people will need to set up a server themselves. But obviously there's also a legitimate use case for having people set up their own server, racing with their friends. So that's another part we're looking at, making that a little bit easier. I think there's a few challenges there. There's always going to be a few issues around your network configuration, how to sort of get some holes in your firewall, get all the routers to forward the right ports. That really is an area that's a little bit out of our control, so I'm not sure how much easier we can make that part. The other part is actually configuring what content you want to run on your dedicated server. And there definitely, as a side effect of us introducing competition, I think we can make stuff a lot easier for people by providing racing series that come pre-configured, where certain cars and tracks combinations are ready to be used and to be hosted on servers. We're also looking a little bit further down the line at providing an actual service for hosting. I know iRacing has that. You can rent them by the hour. That seems to be reasonably popular as well. It takes away a lot of the hassle because you just click what you want to do and everything gets set up. So that's definitely something we're looking into a little bit further down the line. So I hope we'll improve in that area. Yeah.
Sure, fingers crossed. So touching back on what you were saying about Studio 397 and you guys coming up on just over 4 years now, you guys have a bit of a reputation of being a sort of a grassroots developer, recruiting a lot from the sim racing community. How important do you think that is, and how much of your work would you say that you guys do remotely versus directly in the office under normal circumstances? Obviously not under lockdown circumstances where we're all doing everything remotely, but how big is that sort of a modern day workflow for your company?
So interestingly enough, when we started 4 years ago, right away we said we want to be a virtual company. So although we technically have offices and you can go there and we have a simulator there and we can do meetings, everybody's really working from home, and the group of people at Studio are quite diverse in where they are actually located. Obviously, a lot of them are in Europe, but we have people in Australia. We had a few people in the US as well. So the company is set up from the start to be virtual. And I think that made a lot of things a little bit easier, because I think now a lot of companies are struggling with being partially virtual and partially in offices, and that always creates a little bit of tension between people who are in the office and people who are not, in terms of making sure you are involved in all the conversations that are going on, etc., etc. So we've been like that from the start. It's worked pretty well for us. Obviously, it also has some downsides. I mean, there's value in coming together at the coffee machine and having some discussions. So we need to sort of make sure that we facilitate similar ways of just getting together and discussing things. But that's how we got started, and we're still working like that. We're about 30 people big at the moment, and the model is still working for us, so that's interesting. It's a bit funny. Sometimes people talk to me about how do you manage that? How does that even work? And I usually confuse them a bit more by telling them, yeah, probably half of the people in my company I have never ever met, and it doesn't
Sure.
matter. I know their work. A lot of them come either from the sim racing community or out of our network somehow. We all work together well, and really that in the end is all that counts to be a successful company. So we did plan actually to get together for a meeting earlier this year, but yeah, current situations prevented that from happening. So I guess we'll have to do that next year.
Wow. Well, it's amazing to hear about these kind of new workflows for companies. It's something I have a bit of experience with in a different scene that I kind of run most of my enterprises in. And it's amazing how emergently different people interact with each other in those kind of structures now. It's very much less, let's all get to the office and clock in our 8 hours and then get back out. It's a lot more of people just blurring the lines, working in their own time and conferencing remotely, even despite the lockdowns. So it's cool to hear that you guys are running with that kind of an approach. And I'm sure if nothing else, it probably keeps the operating costs down a lot lower and allows a niche sim racing outfit to kind of subsist a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I mean, it does keep some of the operating costs down. In other areas, it complicates a few things. For example, if a manufacturer wants to send us a few samples of their wheel or some other hardware, we actually need to make sure that they send it to the right person, stuff like that. And if someone else needs it, we need to ship stuff around a bit more. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I think we've made it work pretty well. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so to touch on some things for the people that might be less familiar with what you do and, you know, the product that you work on, I guess rFactor as a brand has been around for a very long time now. It's as ubiquitous as sim racing itself. And I suppose to those who have more of a casual interest in racing simulation, could you explain to us what rFactor 2 is, what your overall design goals for it are, and how you feel it sets itself apart from the rest of the sims out there?
Right, so at the core, rFactor 2 aims to be basically the most realistic sim racing experience you can get on a personal computer. I mean, personal computer right now, because consoles are not powerful enough at the moment to run our physics. That might change over time. Definitely the next generation of consoles is looking to be quite powerful. So maybe that will shift our goals a little bit. But we always aim to be the most realistic simulation experience. That's how rFactor started out. I think that's what we aim to be. I think another important part of who we are and what we do is that we always want to be an open system. We want to encourage people, if they want to model their own car or build their own track, or even write their own little software tool to help them with something, that such things are possible. Because I come from a background where we've done a lot of open source development. And in those communities, you see a lot of creativity going on. And we've seen much of that same creativity over the years in the rFactor and rFactor 2 communities and some of the other sim racing communities as well. And I think that's a great way to get inspiration, to broaden the product, and just to have people try out different things, and often things you would never have thought of yourself. So that's what's exciting to me, and that's definitely a direction we want to keep going into.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. And, you know, my comments section is going to absolutely love this. But, you know, when you were talking about it being the de facto most realistic simulation available, the most realistic open platform available for a personal computer, that's kind of what I experienced the very first time I loaded the game. I had no idea what to expect other than people talking about some kind of a legendary, infamous tyre model. I kept hearing tyre model, and then I played it for the first time, and what I got through the force feedback was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my life. And from that day on, it was basically my most played simulator, whether or not I wanted it to be, whether or not it was convenient or easy or setting up games frustrated me or not. It didn't really matter anymore because the driving experience was, for me personally, so far superior to everything else I'd experienced at that point. So I'd say you guys are probably doing a decent job to this point. So congrats on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that for me personally, since I come from an angle where I'm a sim racer myself, that's why I keep coming back to rFactor as well, and did so in the past as well. It's a really good experience, and I vividly remember even the first time I went to Niels Heusingveld, who had one of the first prototypes of a direct drive wheel at his home, and got to play with that for like, I don't know, half an hour. And then he took me away behind the sim again and forced me to talk to him again. But that experience was so amazing. Right then and there, I thought, I need to have a direct drive wheel myself. And this is so awesome. I don't even care for real racing anymore. This is so close. I'm totally happy doing this. So yeah, I think we share similar experiences there.
Wonderful, yeah. And that's ironically about the direct drive. I recently got my very first one back in April thanks to the Fnatic guys. But even prior to that, rFactor, its feeling on the belt-driven wheels, the Thrustmasters, the Logitechs, the gear-driven wheels that I'd played on before, it was always the best. So I don't think it's the tech really that makes it stand apart. It's, you know, some of that special sauce you guys have under the hood. So again, congrats on that front. So Very recently, we had a surge, I suppose, what can only be described as a bit of a brief golden age for sim racing. You guys obviously capitalized on this and hosted a lot of eSports events with the likes of Fernando Alonso, Jenson Button, Pablo Montoya, and like all kinds of F1 legends and current drivers. How did all of this come about? Who organized it, and how do you feel it affected rFactor's perception with the public?
So I think the first event really happened the moment that Formula One decided to cancel the first race in Australia. I remember that evening getting together with a few people from the race whom we were talking about doing all kinds of esports events. And we both thought, well, this is the moment to host an alternative Formula One race in some form. And we have to be quick, right? Because it's Thursday evening, I think it was, they announced that. And we wanted to have the first race up and running in the weekend. So really everybody on both sides scrambled, got together, invited as many people that we knew, both from the racing community and sim racing, got together some kind of format and decided, okay, we're going to broadcast a race and see where this takes us. It worked out quite well, and I think, that led to us doing a lot more of these events later, both with the race, but also then with other partners like Formula E deciding to go virtual with their championship. That's also how we got involved with motorsport, doing some of the production there. And that eventually led to what I would call the big one, the Le Mans 24 Hours. And that really for us was a great experience. I mean, it was super difficult getting everything up and running and making sure things ran smoothly. There were a lot of different parties involved in making that happen. But in the end, I think it worked out pretty well. And recently we even got an award for that. So I think more people enjoy that event. And that's definitely something we want to build on in the years to come. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, the whole situation in the world is a bit volatile, a bit uncertain at the moment. Sometimes I feel like we're profiting for all the wrong reasons here. But it is what it is. I think we all need to make the best out of the situation. And that has shifted a lot of our plans over the year. But I think the sim racing community overall has benefited a lot from that situation. Yeah.
I completely understand. At first I was very frustrated because back in March, my planned trip to the Nürburgring got cancelled, and I'm like, oh my God, my McLaren laps, that was what my whole year revolved around. And then it was like, okay, well, I've got to stay sane while I'm locked away at home, so why don't I start a sim racing channel? And now here we are. I get the chance to interview one of my favorite developers. So you got to look at the positives. I guess the glass can always be half full depending on how you treat the opportunity. And you guys obviously capitalized on the opportunity and put rFactor 2 in the limelight in a very, very big way, in a way that may never happen again in sim racing. Like how unprecedented is this for all of F1 to essentially move virtual for the space of a couple of months? So that's very cool. But looking back, is there anything that you guys would have done differently, given that everything obviously had to be very rushed and spur of the moment?
Oh man, that's always an interesting question. Typically, I just answer that with nope, no regrets. Sure. I think we did well. I mean, there's always a few other opportunities we could have taken, a few things we could have done a bit differently. But I'm very pleased overall with what we managed to do and how those events went. For sure, we also learned a lot about doing big productions, streaming to the internet and to linear TV at the same time, all kinds of stuff like that. I know you have a background in audio, so you know a little bit about some of the technical challenges that you run into when you try to do all that stuff. Broadcasting in multiple languages, for example, we did a few of those as well. So I think we learned a lot, and I really don't think we would have done anything differently looking back, no.
And at the very least, I can tell you guys that you sold me on the Reza track pack. I saw one of the GT competitions at Virginia International, and the moment I saw the guys racing the S's, I'm like, I have to buy this. I went and I bought it immediately in 5 minutes. So I can tell you that your approach there worked on some people. I guess if they're as gullible as I am.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, VRR is a track that not everybody knows, but once you start racing on it, it's a very exciting track, and there's a few more in that pack. So yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So moving on from there, I guess one of the things I wanted to try to do with this interview is try to fill in the gaps in people's knowledge and perhaps kind of bring to light some of the misconceptions in the industry. And these are two big ones that I actually had getting into this. The very first one is, some years ago when ImageSpace Incorporated handed the baton over to you guys to take over the development of rFactor 2. Can you tell us how that came about and kind of what the original story and plan was behind that handoff?
Absolutely. For me, it sort of came out of the blue, really. At the time, I was actually working with ISI. I had just completed the conversion of rFactor 1 to Steam. I was working on doing the same for rFactor 2, and we had just done the first release of that. And literally in a call where we were just discussing on how to proceed and what other Steam features we would like to incorporate in this. And I remember we had a few discussions on whether or not we should be introducing some form of paid content. All of a sudden, I got the question, would you be interested in taking over the maintenance of rFactor 2? And I was a little bit blown away by the question, and then thought, well, maintenance, that sounds a bit boring. I'm not sure if I want to do that, but I thought this is my chance to ask if it would be possible to somehow take over the development and run with it, given that if ISI wanted to do something else, free up some resources to work on other projects, this would be a great opportunity. So I asked them that question. I fully expected them to say, nope, that's not an option. But they said, yeah, we can certainly discuss that. So that's what we ended up doing. I think 4 months later at the Sim Expo, we announced the birth of Studio 397 and us taking over the development of rFactor 2. So it kind of happened really quickly. And like I said previously, I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting myself into, but I thought this is a unique opportunity for me and also for a lot of other people I've worked with in the past to run with rFactor 2, see what we can make out of it, and sort of switch from being a very vocal user about all the things that were still missing in rFactor 2 to being on the other side and being the developer, listening to all that feedback. And I'm sure there's a few people listening to this right now thinking, yeah, but you're not doing exactly a great job on that because you still haven't implemented feature XYZ. And I would probably agree with all of them. The challenge we have is that we really can't do everything at once. So it's all about trying to prioritize stuff for us in the right order. And that's where a lot of the discussion is about, right? What is the right order? Not everybody seems to agree on that, so that makes it a little bit more difficult to come up with that. But yeah, that's how it all got started, Eamon. So yeah, here we are 4 years later.
Wow, it's good to hear. And I guess one of the questions that always comes up in the community is, people, for whatever reason, have seen Studio 397 partially as like a team of content adders, developers, modders, if you will, rather than like legitimate developers. Now, would you care to set the record straight on, do you guys actually have creative license to get right into the engine and kind of mess with the nuts and bolts? You can mess with the tire models, you can add, to the aerodynamic effects, increase the complexity of the simulation as well as just adding content to it?
Oh, absolutely. We have full access to the source code. That's our property right now. So we can do anything we want to that code base. And just to set the record straight on developers, Studio 397 is owned by Luminous, our parent company. We are a software development company, and there's quite a few people from Luminous that have transferred to Studio. So we have quite a few people who have a long history in software development, maybe not all of them in game development. And there are a few differences between the two, but definitely people who have been writing software for a very long time. I think some of us go back all the way to the days of the Commodore 64 and Amiga computers, where we really started enjoying programming. So we go a long way back. So I think we have the experience and the knowledge to make all of those changes.
Wonderful. That's almost as old as me, so it's always good to remember. So there's, I guess, the second part to this question. This is one that really stumped me back in the day. I remember I made this point incorrectly on a few videos in the early days. There's been a lot of confusion as to the relationship between rFactor 2 and rFactor Pro. So could you explain to people perhaps the difference in the two products? Obviously, knowing that you don't actually develop on one of them at all, but could you explain to them at what point the schism happened and why they kind of share the same name?
Absolutely. So rFactor Pro is a separate company. It's based in the UK. And it was founded well before Studio was founded. And I think it emerged out of a project that ISI did at the time, where they were working with some professional racing teams and manufacturers on improving really the rFactor software and ending up completely changing it in ways that it would fit more into a professional simulation environment. So I think I wasn't there at the time, so I'm just going by what I heard and what I know, which for sure is not all the details, but that project led basically to the founding of rF Pro, as we call it now. They focused on most of the high-end racing teams, so a lot of the Formula One teams, a lot of teams in NASCAR and in IMSA, are really building high-end simulations. So if you have millions of dollars to spend, they are a company to talk to, because they can make the really high-end simulation that gets super close to reality, that runs on a whole network of computers, etc., etc. But it's still based essentially on the rFactor and rFactor 2 code base. So technically it's a fork of that code base. Legally, we're completely separate companies. Every now and then we do a few things together, but we mostly focus on our own products and our own markets, which are completely different. I mean, we're focusing on consumers, they're focusing on high-end teams, and I think they're doing a lot in automotive and autonomous driving at the moment as well. So it's a completely different market, but hey, they also need realistic car simulation, so that's what we share.
Sure, and I know this is a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but when do you think we'll be able to get to that level of simulation with the power of personal computing? Even if you just had to guess, just a loose guess.
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, it depends on two things really. One is how computers keep evolving over time. And well, we pretty much know how that will go, right? I mean, there's a constant improvement in, well, not necessarily clock rates. They're hitting a bit of a speed bump at the moment, but we're seeing computers with more and more CPU cores over time, so we can start leveraging those better. And the other part of it is actually how the models that we use for simulation evolve over time. I think at the moment we're already reasonably close. I mean, we talk to quite a few race teams who often develop their own models within rFactor 2, and they're pretty happy with most of the aspects of what we're doing. There's obviously also a few things we need to improve. But really, I think if you look at where we are now versus where we were like 10 years ago, the fact that we all have cockpits and race in VR and triple screens, we have butt kickers, we have motion platforms. I mean, that's the stuff that was in the domain of really high-end professional stuff years ago, and now everybody can enjoy that. So it's hard for me to say where we will be in 10 years from now, but well, a lot closer than we are now, I think, to the real racing. And maybe another question is, where will real racing be in 10 years from now? Because they're also going through a bit of a shift. So exciting times ahead, but I think we'll be able to move even closer to reality for sure.
Fingers crossed, and hopefully by the time we get there, it's not so far down the track that we've kind of lost the internal combustion engine and all the models have to be for electric cars. I hope we at least get a couple of years of crossover. That'd be the best.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a big Corvette fan myself, so I will definitely back you on the combustion engine and the V8. So yeah, I hope that we will be driving and listening to those cars for quite a few years to come. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the litmus test and a story I've loved covering recently is the story of James Baldwin, which I'm sure you're aware of. Big player of rFactor and ACC, a guy that's just gotten into the British GT Championship and literally led every race other than one, I think, where it was raining. And basically on his entry video into Jensen's team Rocket, he's literally playing rFactor 2. He's driving the McLaren 720S at Silverstone and then put him in the real car and he's basically winning at Alton Park, almost winning it at Donington and Brands Hatch. It's unbelievable to see how elegant the transitions from sim racing to real driving are. So I think there's a lot to be said about what you mentioned about the simulations already being very, very close. It's almost like the current PC sim racing seat time almost doubles back as real seat time in an actual car. You're better off spending your spare time doing this rather than, I don't know, kicking back and fishing somewhere. I guess it trains your muscle memory more than the drivers that just take a couple of weeks off in between races.
No, absolutely. I agree there. And I think we're already at a level where some of the teams that are using our software for training are going like, yeah, you have so many things that are dynamic. Can you not turn some of that stuff off? Because it's hard for us to, for example, compare different laps because of constantly changing conditions in the sim. So I think we're already at a point where they're more than happy with what we're doing in terms of simulation and how that fits into their driver training. And yeah, just to come back to the situation of James, and I think there's quite a few others in sim racing that have made or are making the move to real racing as well. I'm not ready to make an announcement yet, but we'll be following some of them more closely over the next couple of months and into the next year. So that's definitely an area that's interesting for us. I think that can be a big inspiration for a lot of our users. I think others will just happily stay sim racing and not make the jump, but definitely good to see that the level of fidelity is so close to the real racing that making the jump is definitely not that hard anymore.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And even for people like myself who have some bizarre dreams of translating this to real life motorsport, even as a hobbyist, it's obviously why I've started orienting immediately around rFactor, because it's the one that gives you in my opinion, the best connection to the real driving experience. So it's really cool that you guys are catering towards that and that's still your goal, to be the most complete simulation available for personal computers. Going back to that, and when you guys first took the reins from ISI, obviously what you've been doing is populating the game with actual substantive content. It's not as disparate as it used to be. It's a lot more unified. You've done a bunch of laser scan tracks to a very high quality standard. You've obviously released a bunch of GT cars, LMPs, all kinds of things. So is it your goal to modernize all of the official content in rFactor 2 to this level? Do you want to bring everything up to the PBR shaders and get it all nice and unified together?
So broadly spoken, I would say yes, that's our goal. There's a few challenges with some of the older content that we inherited because not all of it is in a good place, and for not all of it we actually have all the source files to make the changes we would have to make to bring it up to the level. So in practice, I think there's a few pieces of content that will have to be left behind or be completely remade. Some other reasons are licensing. In some cases, licenses will expire, and obviously we're always talking to the licensors about renewing those. but not in all cases that will make sense for us. So some of it will be left behind, but I think most of it we will definitely upgrade. And you've seen us getting started on that a little bit already. And we're getting the hang of that. I think we'll be doing a lot more of those upgrades in the next year. So yeah, expect new content, but also expect us to take a lot of the existing content and improve it both graphically, sounds, and also physics, making sure that we adopt the latest insights into tire models and stuff that we have there, to leverage all that content and make it fit the game a little bit better again. Because right now we're in the middle of a huge transition. And yeah, there's a huge difference between some of the older content and some of the latest content. It will never completely disappear, but we don't intend to leave all of that stuff behind and never work on it anymore.
Excellent. So I guess to a point, this is a story that you hear in many sim racing games core communities, but one of the ongoing things I've noticed in the forum and kind of hanging around the core community is that there's a sentiment in the community that perhaps the communication between, the core player base and the developers is a little bit fractured, or sometimes the player base feel like they're not being listened to and the priority order is all out of whack to what they'd want to see addressed in the game. When it comes to people contacting you or leaving bug reports or feature requests, would you say the Discord channel is the best place to contact the developers, or how should they kind of voice their grievances if they have any?
So yeah, definitely if you want to have a chat with us and see if we're aware of some issue, Discord is a really good way because we can directly respond and we can have a short conversation on the topic. If there's anything more elaborate that you want to report on, probably the forum is a little bit of a better place because there you can leave a more extensive post and it's easier for us to find those things and go back to them. Something like Discord, if something happened in the morning, in the afternoon, it's already scrolled out of sight and probably nobody will see it anymore. So I think the different media we have are for different purposes there, but definitely get in touch on Discord. A lot of the studio is on there, is at least following what's going on. We might not always respond. I would like to respond more, but quite frankly, I don't always have the time to give everybody a personal answer. But you can be sure that we always do read what's being said and try to filter out what should be our priorities based on what the community provides as feedback. Like I said earlier, community also doesn't always agree on what's the highest priority, so we do have to make some choices, and I'm sure over time we will make some right ones, but also some wrong ones. But we're not in a rush. We'll keep doing this for a very long time, so over time I think, I hope, and I trust that the product improves and people will only get more enjoyment out of it.
Excellent. I suppose one of the things that I hear a lot through my community is that people feel there's a big barrier to entry to rFactor 2 for an assortment of reasons that I'm sure you're already well aware of. But because of the fact that it's kind of renowned to not be particularly casual friendly, do you have any work that you're doing behind the scenes beyond just the UI to make any kind of initiatives to pull more people into the platform who are, I guess, a little more on the casual end of things, not necessarily the guys who might just be playing Gran Turismo, but maybe more the Assetto Corsa crowd and guys who just want a more of an in-between bridging experience to sim racing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we'll do that some of are building on the new UI. For example, one thing that we keep hearing, and I can only agree with that, if you start rFactor 2 for the first time, it's kind of confusing what you need to configure and how everything should be set up before you can actually start driving. So we're working on making that experience a lot easier, streamlining it with a wizard that takes you through the steps. We're also working on something very old-fashioned called a manual, where we can document a few of the things that might not be as clear from just looking at the screen and at the button and going, oh yeah, I know what that's about. So that's one area to improve. The other, I think and hope, will be the introduction of competition and of configuring some series that are, well, predefined and more accessible to run. I mean, obviously in competition, we can start with a few tiers that run things like fixed setups. So you don't have to spend hours setting up a car. You can just jump in and enjoy a competitive race. So that's another area where we want to improve. I think once we have that up and running, we'll also take a look at doing a bit more on the offline side of things, because we are aware not everybody likes to race online or can race online, has the time to do all that. So we also need to make sure that on the offline side, we make it easier for you to, I don't know, start a custom championship, do a few races against the AI, enjoy that aspect of the competition and see if you can beat them in some kind of championship. So those are a few things we're looking at. Obviously, if anybody has any other ideas on that, feel free to let us know what you're struggling with, and we can see if we can make that a bit easier. But yeah, that's in a nutshell what we're working on going forward.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. I kind of hear it from all different ways. There's a bunch of different people, as you know, who are all looking for different things out of sim racing. And while someone like myself, you could give me the Ferrari 488 and the Nordschleife, and I'd be perfectly happy for the next 5 years just hot lapping it by myself. I know that there's a lot of people out there who want like a structured campaign experience. They want to kind of be guided by the game as to a progression mechanic. You know, they're not as into setting up their own races, and they're not into looking through config files. So I guess the more we see that stuff unified, and I gotta say, even for someone that's been into it for as long as I have, having to continuously go into the config files to change certain things about AI behaviors and like graphical settings and the way the wheel behaves that isn't actually immediately obvious in the menu, seeing those kind of things taken care of is probably going to be like, you know, number one on the priority list for me personally. So it's good to know that you guys are aware of these things and are probably looking at them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there's a lot of things we can and should improve on. I mean, when we started out, we pretty quickly already discovered the current user interface not very flexible. It's not very logical for people. I mean, if you get used to it at some point, it all makes sense, but there's definitely a barrier of entry there. And so that has been a focus since the start. I would say we probably underestimated the amount of work that goes into completely overhauling that, untangling all the code in the back end to make that work. I mean, 4 years later, we still haven't released it officially. So yeah, that was not the original plan. I'll be very honest about that. I hope that would have been done a lot quicker. But yeah, we'll definitely keep working on that and make sure that that is a new platform for us to keep improving a lot of aspects of the game going forward. Yeah.
Yep, and I think I guess the average person who isn't familiar with software development and how things work, they probably don't appreciate the gravity of being brought into a project when it's already kind of half done like rFactor 2 was. I mean, you're not basically dealing with a blank slate. You can't just get in there and put in whatever you want. You have to make sure that it plays ball with the initial code base and within the parameters of whatever the engine is capable of. So I guess people always say that, Studio 397, they can't even do a UI in 4 years. But I mean, the challenges involved in working that retrospectively into an old product, I mean, they could be potentially colossal as far as we know. So I guess, is there anything you want to elaborate on there? Like, I suppose the weight of what you're facing when it comes to anything like a minor update. Like, I know recently you spoke about potential drivetrain update you might have planned, some kind of physics updates. I mean, what's the weight of what you're attempting to do with that? I mean, it isn't obviously as easy as going in there and just changing the code. You've got to you move some stuff around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a huge code base. We're talking about millions of lines of code. Which, if you translate that into number of novels, it's quite a large number. It's probably a library full of them. So really, whenever we go in and want to make a change, there's a lot of code we need to study and make sure that we fully understand all the ins and outs of it, which obviously takes some time. So even making a change that might seem rather trivial is not always that trivial. I mean, I have a lot of discussions about that, and some people might say, yeah, well, if it's so difficult, why don't you just throw everything away and start over again? That might be a lot quicker. Actually, from my experience in software development, it hardly ever is quicker. I mean, if you have a huge product and you just start over again completely, yes, you will be able to fix a lot of things and mistakes you made in the past, but you will also make a lot of new ones in that code. I mean, this code might be old, but it's also battle proven. It's definitely something that's been around for a long time. It's been building on simulations that have existed way before rFactor 1 and 2 even. So there's some pieces of code out there that are really solid. There's also obviously some bugs out there that are still very, very hard to pinpoint. So sometimes that gives us some heartaches. But yeah, I think we're now 4 years in. We understand a lot of the code base. We've actually improved or rewritten quite a few parts of it already. And I think we have a reasonably good feeling for the shape of the rest of the code base. I know we've been working hard on fixing some of the multiplayer issues. I think that's become a lot better over the last couple of months. We're still waiting a bit to see how that works in practice. In our testing, it looks a lot better. But the real proof is in the communities out there using that. So that will be a point of focus for us for the next couple of months to really make sure that all of that is properly addressed. But yeah, also on the physics side, I mean, there's a few things we would like to do over time. Drivetrain, a better gearbox model, those are things that are often mentioned and that are quite high on our physics list. I think something that gets mentioned a lot is also how our tire model behaves when driving it with really low tire pressures. I mean, everybody who races rFactor 2 competitively knows that it's usually a good idea to go as low as you're allowed to go on a car. That gives you the quickest lap times. That's not always realistic. There is some point at which the tires will not be faster. So we're still looking into those issues. They're certainly not trivial to fix, but we're slowly getting a handle on those. So those are things over time that we'll definitely address.
Yeah, you basically kind of took the wind out of the sails of my next question there. I was going to dive right into that tire model and the gearbox. So good work cutting that ahead. So with the tire models, this is one that really comes up a lot in the industry, and people talk about, empirical versus physically modeled and all of that sort of stuff. Now, my understanding of the mathematics behind this is very coarse, but from what I understand, rFactor 2 has a semi-physically modeled tire where some of it, uses lookup tables, and then the rest of it's basically physically modeling the actual, the physical structure of a tire, the dynamics of it in real time. Would that be roughly accurate?
That's roughly accurate, yeah. We build a physical model of the tire and how it's composed out of different layers and different materials. And then we basically run it through an extensive simulation, because a lot of the calculations we do, we could never run in real time. They're just too complicated. So whenever we design a tire, after the design is done, we run it through a series of tests. That can take up to 24 hours per tire. So it's quite extensive. And that leads to a big, you could call it a big lookup table for a lot of the data that we then use to simulate the tire in real time, because that model runs at 2400 Hertz, which doesn't give us a lot of time to do those calculations. So a lot of that stuff is pre-calculated. There's also some dynamic stuff coming in, obviously, on top of that. But yeah, your summary is about correct. Yep.
Yep. So you're basically trying to find, I suppose, the best compromise possible with the limited computing power that we have in the personal computing platform right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would figure that, I suppose, using that kind of a model and having to test for all of these different, I suppose, situations and extremes, and having that aspect being offline, you can't immediately just plug a new value into that tire and get the outcome that you desire. Like, there's a lot of finessing the model each way, right?
Absolutely. It's definitely become a bit harder because of that. I mean, if you look at the rFactor 1 tire model, that was a bit simpler, and it was possible to start just tweaking values to make them match, for example, output you got from a real tire. Here we need to take a few steps back every time, which is a little bit more complicated. But in the end, it gives us better results as well. I mean, I think you'll agree that the rFactor 2 model feels a lot better than even the rFactor 1 model, which isn't a bad model at all. I mean, I think a lot of great simulations, such as Automobilista, for example, have done a really good job on that tire model. So it's definitely something you can use very well for simulation. But I think we've gone to the next level with the new model. It's still something that we can improve on a lot going forward. And I'll take the wind out of another question maybe from you about hooking up stuff like tire or environment temperatures to the tires a bit more. I mean, that's another thing that is still on our list. We still need to figure out exactly what the best approach is there, but it's definitely one that's important, especially if you look at endurance racing, at using different compounds, because a lot of those compounds would be used normally under different temperature conditions. And since not all of that is simulated right now, you typically end up using the same type of tires in all situations right now, which isn't completely how it's supposed to be in the real world. So that's an area where we definitely need to improve. And another tire related one is really how the grip levels vary over time when the track gets wet. Our current model does model water depth, it does model marbles and rubber and stuff like that, but I would say we still need to tweak the values a bit to make sure that the actual grip that you end up having on a wet track conforms more to the real life grip you would have. So effects like rubber making the track more slippery on the ideal line, that's not something we correctly model at the moment, and definitely something that's on our list.
Yeah, so it seems like with these different models, whether it be this quasi-real-time, quasi-baked-in simulation or empirical models, you're always kind of, you're choosing what trade-offs you want to make as a developer. If you want to get the figures 100% right, I guess a more classic, simpler model like the rFactor one is probably going to be easier for you to get the kind of, if someone is strictly numbers focused and it's like, all right, here's what happens under these circumstances, we can just plug in the values and get the outcomes that we want. But the journey to get there isn't quite as realistic for the driver, I guess. And I guess that's pretty obvious to anybody who drives rFactor 2 after driving another sim. Even if, let's say, you're driving on minimum tire pressures, which might be completely unrealistic for the given compound, the experience of you driving that car on those tires is still vastly more realistic than something that has quote unquote, perfect values in and out.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, and I think that's absolutely true. Obviously, it would be nice if we can make that experience even better, and I'm sure we will do that over time. It's been something that hasn't been at the top of our priority list at the moment because, quite frankly, we think the model is already quite good, and there's other areas of the sim that are in more need of attention at the moment. So that's why over the last couple of years you might not have seen the big physics improvements yet, but that doesn't mean they're not on our radar. It definitely doesn't mean they will not happen. It's just that we want to focus on some of the other aspects first before we get to this.
Sure. I mean, hopefully with the rise of massively parallel computing for PCs with stuff like the new Ryzen processors, hopefully it's going to give you the latitude to do that and maybe even start putting the AI on a similar time model to the player. I think that'd create some insane single-player races for people like myself who are just single-player maniacs. So I've got my fingers crossed for that. But while we're still touching on the tires, just to kind of beat this horse completely to death, I remember reading an article just after the Le Mans event that you guys hosted recently where Michellin were commenting regarding the performance of their virtual tire and talking about this circumstance and that circumstance and how they would work more closely with you guys to give you more technical data to, get a more accurate model. Has that come to fruition? Like, how important is that manufacturer data to you guys getting accurate outcomes as a simulation developer?
So it's definitely important because they do a load of tests, I would say, on their tires before they put them on a real car. So they have a lot of data that we can leverage. Actually, after their post about the Le Mans event, we got back in touch with them to discuss what we could do together, because in the past we'd already gotten quite a lot of data from them. So our relationship was rather good already. So we're at the moment still looking at some of the new data that they're sharing with us and seeing how that can help us improve the tire model a bit more. Also to be fair, data from manufacturers about the tire model, like any data we get, isn't always 100% accurate or relevant for us. We get some tire data that's not always aligned. Sometimes we work with some of the racing teams. They obviously do their own tire testing, so they have other data. But overall, all of that data makes us get a better picture of the overall performance of the tire under all these different conditions. So it's very helpful. We're very grateful to Michellin for sharing such data with us, because it's sometimes also very competitive data. So it's definitely stuff we cannot publicly share with others, but we're very happy that they're willing to sort of let us look inside their company and look at some of that data. So we love working with manufacturers on this stuff, because they in the end are also people who are very passionate about racing, who are very knowledgeable about a lot of things that we're passionate about. So we always end up having good discussions with them on these topics.
Wonderful. And to throw a completely off the wall one at you, away from the tire models, can we expect the AI to allow us to use flags again at some point in single player racing?
I certainly hope so. There's quite a few issues with it at the moment, both when doing normal racing and when doing oval racing with the stock cars. We've actually been in touch with the stock car community within rFactor 2 for a long time to specifically improve the whole complex situation of flag rules in those races. As you might or might not know, you have full course yellows there, which have no less than, I think, 7 different states in which the track can be, where leaders can pit, where lapped cars can pit, where you're not allowed to pit, where you have lucky dogs getting their lap back, all of that stuff. Quite complicated stuff to totally get right and make robust in a multiplayer environment. We're still working on that. I think as a side effect of that work, we will also see the flag rules for other types of racing improve. We're not quite there yet, but that's definitely something that's on our radar, and that's also something we're discussing for some of the other projects we're working on. Yeah.
Sure. To go with this endless cascade of community requests, one of my last ones is sim racing is kind of known for its very vocal community, and I've found this out very viscerally through my comments section while running this channel for the last 6 months. How do you as developers manage to stay motivated when it seems like everybody's always complaining about everything?
That's very simple for me to answer, because those people complaining, they are complaining out of passion for what they're doing and what they're racing. I always think of them like myself complaining to the developers back in the day. So whilst not all of those comments might be formulated in the most constructive way, they come out of passion, so people care. And for that reason, I don't mind if they talk negatively about some of the things we do or some of the things we need to improve. That just motivates me, and I think a lot of other people within the studio as well, to step up and fix those things. So I don't mind people complaining to me about stuff at all. I think it's important for us to hear that feedback. What motivates me in the end is that I love sim racing. So that will not change whatever people say. So I want to keep doing this for a very long time, and I'm confident that I will. So excellent. Keep it coming.
So sure. Well, we will keep it coming. One of the big ones from the community is, are there any plans to develop rFactor 3?
That's a really good and really complicated question to answer. From a technical point of view, it might be even simple to answer, because technically, even if you were to release rFactor 3 as a new product, it would still be building on all the stuff we've done before, right? I've just explained that even if you build a new product, you hardly ever throw everything away and start over from scratch. So if we were to build rFactor 3, we would definitely build on all the stuff we have. And we might be able to let go of some of the legacy and some of the backward compatibility that we need to be more mindful of right now when we do upgrades. So in the end, technically, the product will keep evolving, and whether or not at some point we will say we're going to release rFactor 3 then becomes a little bit more of a marketing question. And I can confidently say that I'm not an expert at marketing, so I'll leave that question to one of our marketing experts. So really, I don't know yet whether we will make rFactor 3 or not. What I do know is we'll keep improving what we're working on over time.
Excellent. I wasn't planning to throw this one in, but I've been punishing Renee with it over the last few days, so I've got to ask, actually, are there any plans to retroactively add in ray-traced reflections into the engine? And would it even be capable of such a thing?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's definitely some specialist areas where that would improve the graphics a lot. I still vividly remember when NVIDIA started announcing this, when their 2000 series of cards was released. We even got a bit of a tech demo of what that could look like with ACC. Our graphics developers have been talking about various aspects of this technology for quite some time now. I'm pretty confident that we will implement some aspects of that. I'm not yet sure how it will end up. One thing I'm always very mindful of is that we don't implement features that exclude parts of the community. So I'm not a big fan of implementing stuff that only works on an NVIDIA card. We had similar discussions with VR. Should we be targeting a generic API? Should we be targeting Oculus specifically? I'm always a big fan of staying with the stuff that's generically supported, so we can get a really broad user base to enjoy that stuff. We'll take the same route for graphics, but certainly, I mean, especially this upcoming or just released generation of graphics cards starting to become so powerful that it would be a shame not to use any of those ray tracing features, because they do make some of the scenes look so much more beautiful. So I think you can say that's a yes.
Ah, wow. I honestly wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a flat out no. PBR handles all of our needs, and ray tracing is excess and indulgence that we don't require in real simulation. So it's really great that you're open to all kinds of different things, as long as they're able to actually improve the experience that you're creating. So, I mean, that pretty much rounds out the gamut of the questions that I have. I mean, are there any last words you want to leave the community with? Your plans for the future, perhaps, or things that we should look out for, or I guess where we can follow the news outlets for Studio 397?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, most of the stuff we kind of touch on in our roadmaps, and I would definitely follow the next couple of them, because obviously Winter Sale is always an important one for us, so there's a lot of new stuff coming for that. I'm personally very excited about the competition system we're working on. I know we've been talking about it for quite some time, and it's gone through a few internal iterations as well, with us getting new insights into what we should be doing there and how we should approach that whole problem. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that, because it also means I can jump into more races and enjoy racing more people within the community. So that's my personal thing to look out for in the next couple of months. And other than that, I think, yeah, we can expect a lot more content to come, both cars and tracks, because there's still so many pieces of content that we don't have yet and that we do want to add. And we definitely want to make sure that we are a platform that has all kinds of different cars simulated, all the way from karts to open wheelers to GT. And I know we've been doing a lot of GT content, partially because even in real racing, they are very popular cars, so a lot of people enjoy racing them. But we're definitely also looking at doing some new open wheelers, doing some electrical stuff, even though not everybody likes that equally well. I think that has some opportunity for creating cars that are very exciting to race. So I think we'll do a few of those just to see how that works and what kind of racing you can have with that. So yeah, lots of stuff, Ermin. Yeah, I hope that answers the question a little bit.
It absolutely does. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us. You are the best first guest I could think of for this interview series. So thank you very much for joining us. I wish you guys all the best with Studio 397, and let's do this again.
Definitely. Thank you for your time as well, and your patience with my answers. And yeah, let's do this again, and let's race together again.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, mate.
You're welcome.